Tansi, my name is Midrana. I am a third year biology student. I have taken a small step from my side to be a part of a reconciliation process. I got an opportunity to spread awareness among immigrants regarding the indigenous rights and would highlight the detrimental effect of colonialism and racism on indigenous health from which they are suffering till date. In addition to that, I would discuss my future plan and strategies to combat the challenges and to stand with the indigenous communities. I would cover and include the dark side of Indigenous history and shedding light on the initiatives taken and my future commitment and actions. We will now look the insidious history of Canada. Jamaican activist Marcus Garvey quotes, "A people without their knowledge of past and history, origin and culture is like a tree without the roots. Therefore, it is important to dive in history and be familiar with few of the policies. Colonization and enforced genocidal strategies changed lives in profound ways and collectively fractured indigenous people by attempting to erase and dismiss knowledge. The idea of building residential schools across Canada to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children into the mainstream European culture is one of the many racial colonial policies that the Government of Canada implemented to maintain their rule over the Indigenous lands. In addition to that, the Indian Act of 1876, which was imposed upon Indigenous peoples in Canada, remains a painful reminder of colonialism and the ongoing struggle for Indigenous sovereignty and self determination. The 60s coup refers to the mass removal of the Indigenous children from their families and communities in Canada during the 1960s, resulting in the forced assimilation of thousands of Indigenous children into the non Indigenous families and cultures, thereby they lost their cultures. The impact of colonization and the race based system of power in Canadian Indigenous history has been devastating and far reaching, including the loss of land and resources, forced assimilation, and the brutal policies that we discussed. This has led to the negative health impact and loss of trust of Indigenous people. Acknowledging the land is important for immigrants and every individual who are sharing the land known as Canada. Who are the original inhabitants of Canada? Three categories of people are original inhabitants of Canada includes First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. First Nations people are made up of over 600 recognized nations or bands, each with its distinct color and history, and occupy territories south of the Arctic. The Inuit primarily reside in Canada's far north. Most of the land, sea, and ice found in the Arctic region makes up their homeland. Métis people, who have a blend of a European and Indigenous ancestry, are mainly found in Ontario and the Prairie provinces. The question now arises is why acknowledging the land is important. Firstly, it is an act of recognition and sign of respect and appreciation for indigenous people and their culture. Moreover, it plays a pivotal role in the process of reconciliation as it builds a stronger foundation for optimistic and respectful relationships between indigenous and non-indigenous people. In addition to that, it serves as an opportunity for immigrants, especially university students, to learn about rich indigenous history, culture, and their traditions. Thomas King emphasizes on the land of the indigenous people as the issue has always been land, it will always be land, until there isn't a square foot of land left in North America that is controlled by native people. Now we would focus how indigenous health has been affected by the impact of colonialism and racism. The primary effects that are associated with the impact of colonialism and racism are intergenerational trauma, systemic racism, health disparities, high suicide rate, and high incidence of chronic disease among indigenous people. The major effect is the suicide rate among indigenous youth in Canada, which is significantly higher than that of non-indigenous youth, due in part to the legacy of intergenerational trauma resulting from residential schools and other forms of colonial violence. The impact of colonialism and racism on Indigenous health in Canada has been profound and ongoing, with high rates of chronic disease such as diabetes, heart disease, and cancer disproportionately affecting indigenous people. Systemic racism within the healthcare system has also contributed to poor health outcomes for indigenous peoples, including discriminatory treatment, stereotyping, and neglect. To a larger extent, the ongoing impact of colonialism and racism on indigenous health is a reflection of a broader societal inequalities, including poverty, unemployment, and inadequate education opportunities. What does the statistics say? The graph here represents that the indigenous people are mainly suffering due to the mental health condition which includes depression and anxiety, high blood pressure, diabetes and chronic heart diseases. This now creates a larger need for health services which should also incorporate Aboriginal healing practices. The major cause of death among indigenous youth is due to the suicide and self-inflicted injuries. The data provided here suggests that there's 11 times higher suicide rate for Inuit youth than the Canadian national average. As an aspiring psychologist, I have devised a plan which I would incorporate in biomedical system and would try to bring a small change in community. The former chair of Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, Senator Murray St. Clair, quotes, Indigenous healing practices are a critical part of our national healing journey, and we must ensure that they are supported and respected. In order to achieve this in future, I would conduct interprofessional meetings with Indigenous communities and under their guidance and approach would introduce healing practices in medical setting to heal Indigenous people. It would build a trust among indigenous patients when using their cultural healing methods. I would work with knowledge keepers and elders who are skilled in understanding and working with indigenous cultural worldviews and determinants of health to better understand cultural, spiritual, psychosocial, social, historical, political, and community specific aspects of indigenous patients' needs. I would organize timely and proper consultation with Indigenous people and would work on constructive feedback from Indigenous people. I would equally consider and consult my patients' health related issues and social related issues. I plan to serve in rural areas and would conduct seminars and camps to reach out Indigenous communities residing over there. The response that I got from FN students when interviewing for my Indigenous project emphasized more on supporting local Indigenous organizations. So, I've decided to work as a volunteer in local organizations to engage and learn more about them. Secondly, I would attend Indigenous ceremonies and will be actively involved to learn more about their tradition, culture, and ceremonies. In future, I would organize knowledge seminars once a month for immigrants to spread awareness related to the indigenous history and land. I do not want to be a medical professional who just wants to see the world from one perspective. A two-upped monk, two-eyed saying is the model from which I am currently learning to see the world from Western ways and indigenous ways. I have embarked this journey and planning to work on the collaborations model possible for different disciplines. I express my gratitude towards Dr. Raila Wood for giving this golden opportunity and her guidance throughout the project. I truly respect the resilience of indigenous communities and committed to stand in solidarity with them.